In which space are the questions coming from, the research questions that you think about and that you think that is worth it to invest time to try to answer them?
Well, that's kind of difficult because back when I was a teaching professor, I had a research portfolio as well, but that was more what I would describe as a typical structure, metamorphic geology, tectonics kind of world, where I was trying to answer basic questions about evolution of different parts of the crust and understand mountain belts and deformation and that kind of a thing. So that was very much driven by scientific questions that were outstanding. And so you could describe that as, people describe those kinds of things as pure science. Whereas when I came to the US, I did a dramatic shift to work in a group that calls itself the Fracture Research and Application Consortium, and I work at the Bureau of Economic Geology. So the research questions then, they are also driven by fundamental desire to understand processes, but there's a kind of a practical side, which is, what are people going to fund? And so one of the things that we do is to look out for and talk with people about the research questions that interest them, and then try to see how our own research might fit into that. So it's not necessary. So those two worlds are a little bit different. One is totally inwardly led as to what you're interested in, and the other one is that as well, but there's also this pragmatic side where you have to respond to what people are willing to fund.
What comes first?
Neither. I would say, to answer your question, it's neither. It's a dovetailing in of both elements. And very often you can see that if there's a very practical question, maybe the reason why it hasn't been answered is because there's some fundamental understanding that we're lacking. And so then you need to kind of see, well, can we do some basic science to get eventually to answering the question that was set in the first place.
And what do you like to do the most?
I like to I like to gather data. So I like to be in the core repository, looking at fractures, measuring things, or in the field measuring things. And then I do kind of like the writing process, the end part of it, because Steve Laubach, who is the leader of our group, he has a little phrase which is writing is thinking. And I've often thought, yes, that is true, because when you start writing something down, you realize that there are some gaps in what you've just written, and some perhaps things that you've stated that somebody will say, well, where's the reference, or did you measure this, or did you, where has this come from? So you have to be very thorough in what you do. So by that process, you evolve the thinking about the interpretation of what you've got, because you might start with an interpretation, write it all down, and then see there are enormous gaps in your argument, and then you have to kind of rethink what you're doing. So writing is thinking. So I actually quite enjoy that, because it really does mean that you are concentrating on what your data are and what they might tell you.